We've been discussing vaccines for the past 30 minutes, and we do every day. You're the CEO of the stock exchange down there. How much will the vaccine mean to your market and mean to foreign investors coming back to South Africa?
Morning, Manus. I think that the introduction of the vaccine would be very important for global markets, and that would have a compounding effect on South Africa. South Africa has fared pretty well under the constraints of the pandemic. We've recently completely opened up our economy, and relative to other emerging markets, we are doing well. That said, the news of a vaccine, I think, will flood in interest and crowd in developed market funds into the emerging markets, and the risk appetite will lift, and South Africa is well poised as an investment destination.
At the moment, you're on track to register the largest yearly outflows of foreign money since Bloomberg started gathering this data at the end of the 90s. Do you think that a vaccine arrival, will that draw foreign investors back into South Africa's market?
Anne-Marie, I think it's a confluence of many things that will draw funds back into South Africa. The first aspect is addressing macroeconomic fundamentals in South Africa, like the fiscal cliff, like the low growth, like the unemployment rate. The Minister of Finance recently presented his medium-term budget speech, where he's made substantial commitments and unprecedented constraints in public sector spending. There's also an enormous focus on infrastructure investment into the country, and many stock-specific opportunities present very attractive yield opportunities. In addition to that, the bond market yields relative to the underlying risk play well above their equal counterparts, with yields of between 7% and 9% on the 10-year govie.
And everybody's hunting for yield, Leila, and so that will be part of the narrative. We see the rand turn around this month, along with the EM appetite, as you say, crowding in. The appetite is there. How important is a more stable and a rallying rand to drive flow of equity into your market?
Well, rather ironically, the volatility of the rand often attracts inbound investors off the back of that potential yield. That said, when the rand deteriorates, we tend to see more inflows into the country. Many of the hallmark of the JSE is that many of the companies are dual listed. More than a third of our companies are dual listed. They crowd in and obtain much of their revenues from external to South Africa sources. So more than 70% of the top 40 stocks derive their revenue from offshore. So there is certainly a rand hedge and an obvious attraction for yield.
It's been, as we've been discussing, a wild ride for markets in general for 2020. But when you look at Johannesburg's all-share index, we're pretty much back to square one, exactly where we started at the start of the year. What has been the volume on the exchange this year relative to what we saw in 2019?
Our volumes are up more than 20% year on year. And during the March month, that hyper-volatile period, our volumes were up more than 100%. So I think some of the factors and features in the economy that protect us are that many of our large stocks derive their income in next-generation technology, companies such as Naspers and Prosus, who own 30% in Tencent. In addition to that, we've had an enormous PGM rally over the last year, great resources rally. Our banks have taken a real hit in their market cap, and they're starting to now come back. So I think overall, for the fact that we have so many dual-listed companies, many large-scale rand hedges, and we also have very deep markets within the South African economy because the collective investment schemes are controlled by exchange control. And so 75% of their investment remains in the country, which is why we are the 20th largest exchange by market cap in the world, notwithstanding the fact that we're the 33rd largest by GDP.
Laurie, can I go to the other side of that trade? You mentioned NAPSAs and Prosus, but therein lies the other side of the risk for foreign investors. That is such a concentration risk. Does it diminish, or does it risk diminishing the attractiveness of your market?
South Africa is a concentrated market. We have 4 large banks, and we do have large listed entities that concentrate in the market. That said, we also do have a wide diversification across industries. We have deep liquid financial markets. We have companies like Naspers invested in the tech sector, and then we have a very well diversified resource market. So yes, it is a concentrated market, but we offer the yields that compensate quite handsomely for those concentration for the concentration risk.
One of the biggest industries known for South Africa is, of course, mining. China is the only G20 country that we are seeing economic growth for 2020. Will that materially impact, do you think, the listed South African miners?
I think there are a number of factors that affect the mining industry. The exchange rate affects us, and you would have seen that the rand went to an all-time low in March after we were downgraded, and that ironically boded well for the resources company and the mines. Our mines are also very well diversified globally and have bought up assets outside of South Africa. So I think that there are multiple factors at play, and the primary source of our primary mining is not the only factor. That said, China has swung back. It is a large export partner and a large resources partner, and that bodes well for the country.
Leila, you have suggested that because foreigners are forced into rand-denominated collateral, in other words, all my margin, my initial margin, my variation margin is all rand-based. You've made some utterances that there's a possibility of putting forward a dollar-denominated settlement and margin placement. When will that come? How far advanced is that?
We put forward 3 different exchange control reforms, and all 3 were announced in the medium-term budget speech, which we're very pleased receiving a formal endorsement by the government. The first is the dollar-based collateral. We are working with government and policymakers to put in place mechanisms that can enable that. In addition to that, we're also looking at listing dollar-based companies, which would be a profoundly transformational step for the country and a very important growth node to crowd in external finance and also to increase our presence and our credibility in emerging market indices.